Folks seeing my shared screen?
Yes, I'm seeing it, Ron.
Okay, great.
So good evening, everybody. It has been a minute, and I know everybody has had a lot on their plate with looking at the framework. So thank you for being here tonight. And we'll go ahead and kick this off. Let's see. Note about public comment. So we will be having an opportunity for public comment. Obviously, I'm hoping that members of the public can stay on the topic of the agendas. And if it's not on the topic, we may ask you to hold your comment. Speakers are welcome to speak on agenda items toward the end of each of those discussion topics, as well as a general public comment at the end of the meeting. And I will do a roll call. Dave.
Here.
I did not see Stephanie unless she snuck in. Stephanie? Phil is out. Mary?
Here.
I saw Mary. Allie, don't believe she's joined us. Yancy?
Here.
Actually, I think I see Ali on the logged in, but muted.
Oh,
Yes, Allie is here.
oh, yay. Hi, Allie. Let's see. Yancy is here. Sharon. I know I saw Sharon. And I saw Roger.
Here.
Ileana? No, Roberto?
Here.
Has Brent arrived? Chris is here. Bill Reinhardt is not joining us today. Josh, saw Josh here.
Yep.
And do we have Lizzie? I don't see Lizzie. And then Bill Wolpert is also out. So that takes care of our roll call. I think, Ron, I'm covering this slide too. Little meeting overview. We're going to give a few updates. Really what we're here tonight to talk about are the frameworks. So really hearing report outs from the working groups, opportunity for GPAC overall to ask any kind of clarifying questions about those working group report outs. It's very similar to what we did with I think it was early on with some of the initial input on the working groups and the policy topics. So repeating that process now that we have those drafts that y'all have reviewed. We'll then do public comment and then go back for GPAC discussion. That will be the bulk of our meeting this evening, and then we will open it up for general public comment, not specifically on the frameworks, before calling it a night. So in terms of any project and staff updates, very familiar graphic. So we are working towards that land use alternative. We did just get a revised draft of the blueprint with a lot of the comments. So we will start reviewing that and then bringing that around for adoption, and still looking at end of 2025 for plan adoption. That remains our timeline for the entire project. One thing that is happening right now is we are getting ready and preparing the ballot measure for the urban growth boundary. So putting that on the November 2024 ballot for the voters to vote to extend the expiration date of the UGB to 2050. The ballot measure as currently drafted, and which will be reviewed by the City Council on July 1st, was reviewed by the Planning Commission on, I believe it was May 21st. No expansion of the existing UGB, but expanding the date and expanding some of the language specifically around the area where the Petaluma North station, smart station, will be. to look at transit-oriented development opportunities in that half-mile radius of that station. So that is really the primary change, even though it's not actually changing the urban growth boundaries. It is outlining that opportunity for an expansion more specifically in that area in the future. So that is coming to City Council near you on July 1st. Kind of already mentioned this, but we are reviewing that final draft of the blueprint for carbon neutrality. So got a lot of comments from the public, from the CCBs, from the GPAC on the blueprint. So we are moving towards adoption hearings in the fall. It'll go to Climate Action Commission, likely August, Planning Commission, and then finally to City Council for adoption.
You want me to do this one?
Yeah, why don't you take it from here, Ron?
Great. Thank you, Heather. Good evening, everybody. It's good to virtually see everybody. Hope you're having a good start to, well, I guess, a good end of spring, good start to summer. Just want to give you a quick update on where we're at on the land use side, because we said all along that we're going to initially look at the other 13 frameworks and then bring back land use, and we're getting very close to that moment. It's very dense, as you can imagine, and so we got extensive comments from the city on the initial admin draft. We're very close to finishing the second admin draft land use framework. I actually hope to have it to the city next week, and then concurrently and in a way that's consistent with the land use framework as written, working on a briefing book that'll be the foundation for the upcoming community engagement focused on land use. And so those materials then require city review. Hopefully for the framework could be relatively quick, because it's really just a check that we've incorporated what they requested on the admin draft, and then we'll be gearing up for public review. And we've already begun some initial preparations for that public review, most of which we anticipate coming after Labor Day, largely because we want to make sure folks are back from summer vacations, kids are back in school. We know that I think council and some other CCBs take the month of August off. So we wanted to do it during a time when people are more likely to be around. As with the policy frameworks to date, we'll have the option for people to provide comment online. We'll also have a survey specific to anticipated land use changes, either in policy or in designation on the land use map in the GP. And then otherwise, we're at this point largely planning on focusing our in-person engagement around a set of area meetings, focusing very much on those areas of change that we've been discussing with you and PC and council for some time now, with the idea being kind of like go to those places, talk with people in their neighborhoods about potential change in those areas, and really dive in on a kind of place-based perspective. And then complement those with a whole set of pop-up meetings, again, kind of with the idea of like go where people are. So actually take pop-ups to proposed 15-minute activity centers, to other planned events, and use those to get input on key potential changes in land use or otherwise in those specific areas. And then during the entire public engagement process, we assume and intend on having likely a series of meetings, both with you and with the Planning Commission, to support kind of a deep dive into the range of policy questions that are raised when you start thinking about that land use foundation for the rest of the general plan. I think that is it for our staff updates, but we'll pause here really quickly before moving on to see if there's any questions about anything Heather or I shared.
I have a question about when will GPAC have access to the land use framework? Is that coincident with the access to the public and in the Labor Day timeframe?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I wasn't clear. We'll probably release it well before Labor Day. We're meeting actually Monday this next week to kind of talk through in more detail the timeline. A lot depends on how quickly the city is able to turn around their review, and that's part of what we're going to discuss and kind of the specifics of that. But a big picture, I'm anticipating August release would be my assumption at this point. Similar to what we did with the other frameworks, release it as soon as it's ready, and then give people time to digest it, and then roll out the events and activities to support that review in latter weeks. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Ron, do you want me to call on people or do you want to do that? Are you able to see?
I can do that, yeah.
Okay, I wanted to make sure.
I see Dave's hand, then Mary.
Okay, just a quick question on what Heather said about the climate blueprint. Ron, the last time you and I spoke, which was during the combined PBAC TAC meeting, you had said there would be a coordinated, cohesive approach to carbon neutrality date, et cetera, that would be settled on by the city council before documents like the blueprint were finally adopted. And I don't know
Oh.
how that relates to the fall adoption.
Maybe I wasn't clear. So my assumption has been council will adopt the blueprint prior to the adoption of the GP. It's well ahead of it, right? So I'm anticipating council adoption sometime this calendar year, right?
Okay.
And then we'll take that and make sure that the rest of that the general plan is consistent with and advances implementation of the blueprint.
So are you saying the blueprint will be adopted with the carbon neutrality date staying at 2030?
I can't foretell how council will adopt the actual blueprint, but if they adopt it as is, then yes.
And what that would then imply the general plan has to align with 2030. And, transit is my particular issue. We are so far away from accomplishing that, and the city doesn't have anywhere near enough dollars to make that happen. So I'm hearing an inconsistency here.
It's a good question. I haven't read, my team it's led by Eric and his crew, and I haven't even looked at the latest draft, which just came to the city a few days ago. So I don't know how it speaks to the point you're raising, which is that the plan, last time I read the previous draft, it said that the city has a target of 2030, but it basically acknowledged that that's not reachable. And I don't know how it's currently written. Heather, have you happened to?
I haven't looked at it at
Look at
all.
that
I think
section.
when we did go, when we went through Climate Action Commission and then council, there was an acknowledgement that our original marching orders were to 2030, 2030, 2030 and do everything we could, but there was a recognition that it's very unlikely we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030. But I don't know. I haven't even been able to open the email yet, Dave. It's
Yeah.
literally hot off the presses for us. So I don't know how, if the wording just got changed to kind of be like, acknowledge it as a difficult, but still let's do everything we can, or if that date has slipped,
Okay.
in a pragmatic approach to be realistic about what we're trying to do. I don't have the answer yet.
Will that come back to this group?
I don't know if it's we will definitely, as soon as it's released, as soon as it's available, send it out for everybody to look at it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Heather, correct me if I'm wrong. You raised a really interesting point. So the way I understand the blueprint is primarily as an action plan, an implementation plan, right? A guide for a city to do everything it can to try to achieve carbon neutrality as quickly as possible, right? It's not a policy document in that respect. Is that correct?
Well, I think it does put some policies out there because not everything is exactly how we're gonna do it. So a lot of the things are, action plans under different sectors. But it's not it's things like, adopt a burnout ordinance to phase out all whoever's sharing their screen and showing their email, just,
Oh, that's me, sorry. Yeah,
Um,
I was gonna go open the draft.
but I do think, you know, there's the difference between, let's keep just pedal to the metal to the extent we can with an acknowledgement that we're not going to be there at 2030, or do we, you know, change that and acknowledge a new date as our target? But there's an acknowledgement that the resources, the funding to do all the things that are in the blueprint are an incredibly hard lift, and the likelihood of that happening in the next, realistically, 5 years is probably not super realistic. I'm trying to say all the right things here, you guys. We're going to do our best.
Right, and Dave, I want to make sure I understand what the questions that may be underlying your question. I mean, the adopted CAPs, climate action plans, can streamline development if they're qualified plans, and Petaluma's plan exceeds the
Right.
standards required for it to be a qualified plan, so that's not an issue. And so as long as that adopted plan is in place, the GP CEQA piggybacks on that, then the GP will therefore benefit from all those streamlining effects, right?
No, and if you're adopting a plan in order to open up grant funding, streamlining, whatever, I get that. My concern has always been if we're telling the public this is our goal and we fall way short, do we lose credibility with the public? And you know, we've got a long battle in front of us, and how do we keep the public believing that the city knows how to get there?
Mhm.
Now, that's a great point, and that's I think that's going to be a big part of a discussion when we start talking about the draft general plan. I mean, a lot of people have commented, including yourself, Dave, that it's frustrating in the frameworks not to see clear targets and or other metrics that we can use to actually monitor the city's progress towards achieving those goals. And the plan has been all along to include those in the draft general plan. But that'll raise a ton of very interesting questions, like, do we set super ambitious targets and knowing that we probably won't reach them, or do we aim for more realistic targets and take a more pragmatic approach? So that's part of your question. I think we'll return to that when we're discussing what specific metrics to use and what targets to set for those.
I'm sure it will. Looking forward to that conversation.
Yeah. Great question. Thank you. Thanks for your patience, Mary.
No problem. Thank you. Regarding land use, the framework that's coming out that we haven't seen yet. I signed up for that working group along with Allie and Sharon, and it seems to me that there's going to be so much input before we see that. I'm just thinking maybe you're rethinking this, but I'm rethinking that it should just come back to the entire GPAC. It's the big issue, and rather than 3 people on a working group working on the most important element of the general plan, it seems like the direction now, I'm just inferring from what the presentation is that it's really going to come back to everybody, and we're not going to be this 3-person land use working group.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually assumed something slightly different, more akin to how the Planning Commission has been approaching its review of the policy frameworks, where they formed ad hoc groups, each of which focused on a set of policy frameworks. And those working groups did a thorough review and brought back written recommendations to the full Planning Commission. And what I liked about that approach is the entire Planning Commission considered each framework, but really, but also made sure that a smaller group of them took a very close look. And so I would hope that the land use working group still takes a very close look at the framework, supplemented by what will probably be a series of GPAC conversations where the GP team will probably identify some critical issues that kind of merit some broader GPAC discussion, and then maybe conclude with working groups more detailed review, something like that. I haven't thought it through in great detail, but I actually see a lot of benefits to a smaller working group taking a deep dive. I don't know if Heather, you had other thoughts on that question.
I mean, I think we have the opportunity to do it, you know, the way people want to do it, but at the same time, it might even end up being a hybrid, Mary, where the working group is doing the deep dive, but you're gonna have a lot more interaction with the GPAC as a whole when you bring back those recommendations, because I think this current round, most members of working groups have kind of stuck to their assigned frameworks and haven't had the time to then go and read all of them. So if land use is coming out and it's not concurrent with a bunch of other frameworks, you might find there's more interaction with the GPAC in discussing it. So it might do both. There might be a deep dive by the working group, but still a lot of conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on the project and staff updates? Okay. All right, thank you. I'm just gonna give a very brief kind of recap of all the different opportunities for members of the public to weigh in on the policy frameworks. Just to kind of give you a debrief, we gave you a preview of how we're going to approach it. There were some adjustments along the way, and kind of want to make sure everybody understood all of what we did and was done. So first, it was quite extensive, but extremely fruitful to take all of the appropriate frameworks that fell within the purview of each of the committees, commissions, and boards and have discussions with them. We got some excellent feedback, very much focused or based on the expertise of each of those city CCBs. So it was time very well spent. So at this point, we did that with bike ped, transit, airport, HCPC, 2 meetings with the Climate Action Committee, one focused on transportation and natural environment, the second on flood resilience, Senior Advisory Committee, Rex Music Parks and Tree Advisory Joint Meeting, Public Art, and then where we've had 1, 2 of, seems like more than that, 2 of 4 meetings, Heather, or is it with the Planning Commission? Did
I feel
forget
like we
them?
had one more in May, but
Yeah, anyway, it's a series of 4 or 5 meetings with the Planning Commission going through each of the frameworks. And then obviously, as you guys all know, working groups of the GPAC all took a deep dive at them as well. So, and then to supplement that kind of technical review, also had a very successful Plan Fest on May 11th. Thanks to many of you for helping out with that. It's a great, well-attended event, got lots of great comment. Also, we think it prompted lots of folks to go home and take a closer look at many of the frameworks, because we've also been receiving a lot of follow-up comment, either through the online portal, I'll change screens here, or through supplemental written comment. And so during this time on the website has been all the frameworks, videos from the presentations given at CCB meetings, and obviously an online form for people to submit goal and policy specific feedback. I already talked about Plan Fest. So anyway, it's comments still coming in. We're giving people end of the month deadline for getting that in. And then the next step is for Planning Commission. It was going to be next week, but there was a problem with quorum. Not yesterday, Tuesday. And so there's going to be a July 9th Planning Commission, which will conclude their review, we think. And then we have the challenging task of organizing all of what I think is probably over 1,000 comments at this point, in a way so that we can clearly present to City Council what we plan on adjusting about the policy direction based on all that useful input, so that we can confirm with them that we're headed in the right direction. So that's likely to be sometime in the fall. I did want to just say a few things that after reviewing the written comments submitted by the working groups. We did this with all the CCBs too, because a lot of people, I think, were expecting to see initial drafts of the general plan when reviewing these frameworks, and that was not the intent. The general plan will be very different, and it will address many of the omissions that people have been highlighting in their review of these frameworks. We heard from you and many others loud and clear long ago that all of this needs to be present a coherent, holistic, integrated, strategic set of goals and policies for the future of the city, and that it should be presented in a compelling visual way. That is certainly our intent with the general plan. That was not our intent, or we are not able to do that with these public draft policy frameworks. We very much wanted our technical experts and their partners in city departments to stay in their lane and focus on their areas of expertise so that we could really try to get the goals and policies right. And so we had very much of a written technical orientation of these frameworks. And we know there were a lot of challenges associated with that. And so we know that we're going to take a very different approach to organizing the general plan when we get to those drafts. Speaking of which, we'll do it probably in multiple ways. We'll organize it by element, obviously, but also by some of the key themes and priorities in the community. And do that using a digital format ultimately so that it's easy to find whatever topic or subtopic you're interested in and look at the general plan through that particular lens. If you're interested in an example of how that's done, I suggest you look at the South San Francisco general plan website. URLs on the screen here. You'll see that it's a really neat way to approach different aspects of the general plan in a variety of ways. A lot of people have also talked a lot about metrics and wanting specific actions and accountability associated with those actions. Again, that very much will be part of the draft general plan. There'll be really two pieces that are related but different. An implementation plan, which is really organized as an action matrix, where there'll be a clear action, implementer, priority, time frame, and distinguish roles as appropriate in implementation between city, community, state, other partners, etc. And then separately, but related, also metrics associated with the goals so that the city can independently track how well it's doing to achieve its goals. And then an implementation step in the GP. And if you've read the governance and implementation framework, you'll see that it's there, but regular reporting and monitoring of those metrics to actually see that whether or not we're moving in the right direction. And if not, then take the opportunity to make a course correction. So again, GP will be very much different, and we appreciate your patience with slogging through what is pretty dense and very text-heavy policy frameworks. So with that context, we thought we'd, at this point, turn it over to the working groups. On this next slide, we have the folks who were in each group and the policy frameworks they focused on. I see already that I'm not sure we have a representative from each working group tonight to share reports. I believe, however, you all received copies of the submitted written comments. And I'd just like to say thank you all very much. They're all very helpful, some more detailed than others, but all very helpful. Extremely thoughtful feedback. But we did want to give the GPAC an opportunity to talk amongst themselves about people's review and some of the thoughts the review may have invoked, either specific to those frameworks or in a more general sense. And kind of along the lines of the slide I was just sharing, if you have additional thoughts about what should be different about how we approach some of this in the general plan, this is a great time to share those as well. Was going to just go from top to bottom here, but just let me confirm, is anybody from the Open Space and Natural Resources Working Group here tonight? I don't believe so, but I still want to double check. Okay.
I'm sorry, I just submitted Lizzie Wallach.
Okay, great. Welcome, Lizzie. But I don't believe Bill Reiner or Stephanie are here tonight. Is that correct? Let me ask a separate related question. Was anyone else heavily involved in the open space and natural resources framework, but not a official member who would be in a position to share highlights of its review? Members of the GPAC? Don't see any hands raised. Right. Why don't we move on then to the hazard mitigation, climate change, and resilience working group. I know some of you folks are here tonight. Brent, I'm not sure is here. So Roger, I guess the ball's in your court. Do you mind
Yeah.
sharing a brief update or report on your group's review of those three
Yeah,
three policy frameworks?
I came a lot quicker than I realized. So we there was a few different reports, and I'll say we all kind of reviewed them separately. And to make the deadline, I think we all did our comments, which are out there, but we didn't have a chance really to discuss too much together. And we all have different, I would say, areas of expertise and interest. I read the 70-page sea level rise adaptation thing, and being kind of a boring engineer, I kind of delve into the weeds. So my comments are all about that, as if I was reviewing, which I was, reviewing a report and providing comments. So I would say there's a lot of good things. I think maybe things that jumped out at me. Probably some, and I don't know how much of this makes it in the general plan. I kind of commented on what I reviewed. A lot of things that were sort of unfunded mandates potentially. So I get that feeling out of a lot of items, including some near the end that could really potentially add a lot of costs to housing. So a lot of costs to the city, like a funded home buying program. Well, that's a very costly thing. So I don't know how much of that makes it in the general plan or if it's a recommendation. So I commented on things like that from my perspective as sort of an in the weeds kind of person. And I think other people, looking at some of the other comments, I see a lot of people have a more expansive, goal-oriented, visionary looking at these things, which is really good. So I think we all bring different things to the table, which hopefully is good in the end. But those are, and then of course, the big thing about the climate change is that the actual adaptation measures and leaving space for them is a separate report that is yet to be done. That not West, but the other firm that did that is in the process of doing, which I don't think we'll have in time for the general plan. So you could argue that a big report that fills in exactly what the city wants to do, if it gets that far, it's not what's there for review. I couldn't.
Are you referring to the flood adaptation master?
Yeah,
plan?
I think that's what it's called. I have to admit, I did my comments now a few weeks ago, so I've been kind of busy with work, and so I don't remember 100%. But they're all in there. It's like several pages. I don't know if the city had any thoughts on them. There were some things there like would be kind of unworkable in the real world. Like if you could read it as if the city paves a road, it has to then make it sea level rise adaptable, which would be, of course, you couldn't really do. So I think we have to just go with an eye towards making them achievable. But there's a lot of great stuff in there, and I gave comments. And then I don't, unfortunately, Bill and what's his name are not here to talk about theirs. So we all, since there was 3 different reports to review, we all did them sort of separately.
No, thank you for your close review. We kind of expected it from you since it's kind of your field. So thank you for doing that. And actually, thank you also because you helped develop parts of the framework as well over the course of several meetings. I was curious, since safety and flood resilience were part of the working group's review, did you guys talk at all about complementarities between safety and flood resilience, or?
I mean, we still can, but we didn't. So maybe something we can sort of schedule and do. I think we barely made the deadline.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, kind of work and life. We're still work 40 or 50 hours a week plus. So we didn't really have a ton of a chance. And same with everybody else. I think Brent was probably the best ahead, but Bill and I were rushing.
I see Heather's hand raised.
Yeah, Roger, I just had a question, noted about some of the provisions not feeling super practical based on costs. What did you have any, and I haven't looked at your written comments on this one, but feedback on some of the things like the development standards that were kind of built into the flood resilience framework?
Yeah, I thought those were good overall. Yeah, I did have some questions in the weeds, kind of questions about, they're referencing, the 100-year, the 500-year, more of like some practical, and they called for remapping by the Corps, which is not something the Corps does that I know of. So, but I would say that I think their ideas were good. They're high, they're big standards. Those to me make a lot of sense. But ultimately, in a situation of coastal flooding, raising a house or two doesn't really help you, because the tides come in and out all the time. So it's a little different than fluvial flooding, where the storm passes and your goal is just to keep it dry. So I think there also have to be the other side of the adaptation, which is the direct flooding, and that's coming in this adaptation plan. So I call for something now. What's got me kicked out of parks when I was in the Parks Commission, which is really looking at that dual use of fields. For some, we really have to. It didn't go over very well in Marin, where I work, but I think that ability to multi-tap purpose our fields where we need to. Because things like LID and rain gardens, they're nice things to do. They don't really help with flooding very much. They're very small impacts there. Maybe water quality, but so I think that'll come out in the adaptation plan, the more the details. And then I worry about some of the things potentially increasing the cost of housing a lot, and then people complain, why is housing so expensive? So I think that sort of, I think it's easy to put everything onto a general plan, sort of a wish list of goals, but hopefully at some stage there's a look back at what it does to the cost of things, or what's affordable. But that's probably not for us. It's probably for the city.
Yeah, great
If you
comments.
have specific questions on the comments, I'm happy to take those, at another day for sure.
Yeah, no, just for everybody's reference. So every comment is getting its own row in a elaborate spreadsheet, noting who the comment came from, allows us to sort them by specific goals and policies. So the chief authors of each framework will be using that to digest all the comments, kind of by goal and policy, and then make recommendations to the city for what to revise. And part of the reason we're making it clear where the comment came from is exactly for that reason. It's likely there may be some follow-up questions, and so yeah, thank you.
I think the strength of this group is everybody sees and looks at things with a different lens, from maybe the micro to the more visionary, which is great. Hopefully that helps.
One other quick note, since you mentioned the dual use lands, there is a section of the land use framework that complements flood resilience. It's where we're kind of put it's kind of in an open space section, but it's focused specifically on preserving open space along the river where possible, often for dual use. So that's coming as well to complement the flood resilience framework.
There's really no other way around it. If you're for riverine flooding, is detention is the only really realistic solution. So, Marin's very NIMBY, so people voted it, made it impossible, and that's resulted in a failure in a lot of ways of some very expensive programs. Whereas in Berkeley, I used to do creek projects as a consultant, and we were able to do them there, no problem, like Cordonesis Creek and such. People don't use the fields as much in the winter anyway, so there it works really well. So I think there's some room for that, but yeah.
I was going to save questions from GPAC members till the end, but I'm thinking since this maybe it piqued some questions or interest from other GPAC members, why don't we pause right now, see if anyone has any questions for Roger about his working group's review of policy frameworks. Mary.
Just to throw out one for you, Roger. I was previously on the open space or natural resource, whatever you want to call it, natural environment group, working group. I didn't do it this round. but we had talked about how the whole north reach of the river could also have this multi-purpose use that you were talking about if it's not developed, and as you called it, detention, but slowing of a flood. Is that something that you think would help a lot?
If it's the fluvial flooding, I think the climate plan, I mean, the flood plan was pretty good about preserving the river floodplain for coastal, for, a tidal flooding. So I'd have to look at the specifics of the site you're talking about. But on the tidal side, detention, less of a thing, and more about slowing the water, breaking any waves that might happen. So, if that's helpful.
Yeah, because the upper reach, the Denman reach, has engineered kind of retention flooding depressions that they built. But that's even further up creek. So that's why I wanted to know about the whole area that's in the middle, really.
Yeah.
Sort of the Rainier Crossing area.
I probably have to sit down with you to look exactly. I again sort of reviewed what was the document in front of me. They didn't call that out specifically. I don't believe.
I can speak to that a bit, because that's what's in the land use framework, actually, and it mirrors exactly what we talked with GPAC about. I forget which meeting it was. Remember when we were talking kind of about citywide level strategies, and started really with, all right, first order of the day is preserve that existing open space up north of or upriver of the Weir, right? For, again, because there's natural resources to preserve, it's needed to mitigate flooding. There's a community vision for open space and parks and trails, that it very much multi-use. And so that's like, it's one of the initial goals in the land use framework as written. So you'll see that very much there.
Actually, I've always wondered about the Weir. So that got all built before I moved to town. But the Weir just pushed the flooding upstream. And you can see, so like somehow the CEQA didn't capture that, because it really what should have been done is the mitigation, like maybe you're talking about back then. And so, the water, so they did help with payran, of course. And that's very old school engineering, weirs and sheet pile walls, but the gets flooded upstream. And now against all those areas that have, you can see them all sandbagged. A lot of these, the building, Hertz is and stuff, because they flood. So in a way, this plan could help fix maybe some of these past flood control efforts.
Sharon, I see your hand raised.
I just had a quick comment about, didn't read the frameworks that Roger's group was responsible for, but I do have concerns about us adding additional costs to housing construction. I'm just really wary of anything that's going to make it more difficult to house people in Petaluma. So just wanted to voice that concern.
Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments related to the focus of Roger's working group? Okay, hearing none. Well, next is land use, and waiting for the land use framework, you guys looked at the economic development and noise frameworks. That's Allie, Mary, and Sharon. I don't know which one of you would like to share the working group's
Not me.
feedback, or all of you a little
Mary
bit.
or Sharon. She's pointing to Sharon on my screen.
Okay. That's funny. Okay. Well, if you guys promise to jump in then. So we reviewed the economic development framework, and we had intended to highlight 5 policies that were that were critical, and I think we ended up submitting just 4, and I'm not quite sure how that happened, but in any case, I'll step through what we thought was most important. We really believed it's important to invest in downtown, but also to refocus on incentivizing property owner participation. So we have a lot of blighted properties in the core of our downtown. And, you know, we have some ordinances on the books that require cleanup of properties. They're not actually being enforced. There are properties that are in gross states of disrepair. But beyond those remedies that we have available today, we really think we need to we need to consider a vacancy tax as a kind of a stick to ensure that people actually do what they need to do with their properties. You know, beyond the blighted properties, there are properties that have been listed for lease forever, and one starts to wonder if the property owners aren't, you know, finding that it's to their advantage to take the tax break for the unrented property versus actually make an effort to rent it. So for example, the La Via retail space has been listed for 470 days. So there's got to be something we can do to revitalize the properties that are underutilized downtown, whether they're blighted or just simply not leased. And then I think it would be useful. We talked about some kind of amnesty or alternative use of the properties that would let, you know, even if it wasn't something that the property owner wanted to do long term, that in lieu of a vacancy tax or some other penalty, they could have some pop-up uses for the properties to turn them into contributing parcels rather than blight. So if we want to invest in our downtown, it's important that we clean it up. I think that's the bottom line there. We also supported the policy around living wage job growth, and the rationale is that we really need to meet our carbon neutrality goals. It's essential that workers in Petaluma also be able to live in Petaluma. So you could approach that a couple different ways: build more affordable housing or actually pay people more. So I think it's important to also pay people more, and the building more affordable housing, of course, gets tackled in other frameworks. And then another policy that we thought was important was to grow hotel stays in Petaluma, because that, you know, does contribute quite a bit to city coffers, the transit occupancy tax. And to that end, we really encourage the general plan to call out a need for actually branding the city. We don't really have a, you know, what is Petaluma brand that we can speak to and easily point to. And I think other communities in the region have done that with pretty good effect. And I think there's a lot of support for doing that in Petaluma. And then the other framework that we really supported was the encouraging retail and businesses near residents. So we're not talking about the 15-minute centers, but actually to change zoning to allow for pop-ups for startups and wealth building in certain residential zones. So it's our opinion that we're leaving too many would-be entrepreneurs out of the discussion since they've been relegated to expensive retail space in town. So those are the policies that we really wanted to promote. And then there are a few that we were not keen on, and I can discuss those as well. Were there any comments on the first batch though, or should I keep going?
Why don't you keep going and then we'll come back to
Okay.
questions, comments.
Mary and Al, if you guys want to clarify anything, please jump in. So our least favorite policies had to do with maintaining industrial land inventory action. I think there was one action that was detailed under that policy that was consider expanding the UGB to create more available land for employment and light industrial uses. We did not support that. There's, you know, limited community support for that, as near as we could tell. We had so much discussion. We're talking about, you know, extending the urban growth boundary, not adding to it for light industrial uses. Similar response to develop industrial sites near Highway 101. We really wanted to see those are either, you know, carbon neutral or green in some way if we're going to do that. And then this is a little